Hi, everyone. I know we're the last two holding you from the after party, so thank you for your attendance and attention. My name is Karan, and I'm joined by Antonio. We both represent Putnam, and sorry, you can't see that. We'll just have to go with here. It's fine. So we are Putnam, and we have over 30 years of experience supporting biopharmaceutical companies in terms of commercial strategy. We've supported bringing innovative medicines to the market and helping top 20 biopharma throughout the strategy. We work through a lot of different therapeutic areas, and we work with a lot of different functional areas, mostly focused on commercial, but with some focus on medical as well. So today we're focusing on three main topics. One is thinking about customer engagement and thinking about how we reposition customer engagement in an ever-changing healthcare landscape. Two is thinking about how we actually build and understand that high ecosystem IQ. And three is thinking about pushing the boundaries about how we can actually think about customer engagement in the future using a concept called microenterprise, which is a business model concept that maybe some of you are familiar with. It's worked quite well in some other industries, and we think there might be some merit in the pharma industry as well, so we'll talk about that. So customer engagement, and what does it mean in the healthcare landscape today? And really there's three main realities that we see that are changing in the healthcare landscape today. One is the new financial reality. So looking at the pricing pressures that companies are facing, both from legislation, when you think about things like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, or legislation from Europe, thinking about reducing data exclusivity, to the rising cost of goods with APIs costing more and more and more. You see that there's pricing pressure on both ends and really becoming a key concept and topic to think about for companies. When you layer that onto the customer realities, we see that the customers are changing. The customers are organizing more. There's more consolidation happening in the market. You think about integrated delivery networks in the US, some integrated care systems across Europe. So the profile of the customer is changing too, and hence the engagement with the customer is going to change throughout. And lastly, customer jobs are changing, and so it's shifting away from the product and thinking about other aspects as well. So we have to keep that new customer reality in mind when we're thinking about new and innovative customer models. And lastly, the pharma innovation is changing. So we'll think about pharma developing new complex therapies. A lot of pharma's pipeline is now focusing on underserved therapeutic areas and rare diseases. So when you think about all these different nuances and considerations that are happening in the landscape, we feel like there's this sweet spot where customer engagement and then thinking about the right customer engagement model, you have to make sure you're optimizing for all these different things to make sure that you're developing the right targeted customer engagement strategy. So we did a comprehensive research analysis last year where we looked at over 150 recent product launches. And what we tried to do was try to figure out how did they perform with analyst expectations. And so on the right side, underperformers, essentially once they came on market, they didn't perform as well as analysts expected. Overperformers did better than analysts expected. And what you can see from the data, we had them archetyped in three different ways. What is their differentiation to the market incumbents? Are they coming out with a highly differentiated product or not? And what is the maturity of the care pathway? So is this an established care pathway, or is this something where it's essentially a new care pathway has to be developed with this product? From the data, more than half did not perform as well as analysts expected. But the good news is that there is a number that actually did better. And when you try to understand what are some key trends of the overperformers, we have some of the highlights on the right here. So, a lot of them, the companies had high ecosystem IQ. There was a lot of frontline empowerment, and we'll talk about what these things mean a little bit more. Sharp value narrative, virtuous customer engagement continuum, a good all-in-one patient experience. So these are things that have essentially helped create success for the overperformers in this analysis. But I think the two that really stand out to us are the top two: having a high ecosystem IQ and having a good frontline empowerment. And we'll talk about what those things are in the next few slides. So again, when you think about customer engagement, there's many different points in the patient journey that we can actually engage. And we kind of think of this as a patient journey or a patient funnel, thinking about early stage where there's disease awareness and characterization, moving through access, diagnosis, referral, treatment, and adherence and monitoring. And in every step of this journey, we can engage and we can actually create essentially or augment that experience and essentially create a better engagement model. But I think the question becomes, where are the big bets? What is underserved by companies today? What are the areas that are overserved? And we see that across the different steps, there's a lot more attention being paid to the adherence and monitoring on the treatment side, when in reality there might be a lot of opportunity or big bets, as we're calling them, earlier on in the funnel. And so a lot of this really comes down to a high ecosystem IQ, really understanding the market, really understanding the landscape to make sure that you're creating your customer engagement models to be optimized for it. Antonio, do you want to take everything through?
Thank you. So the question that we asked ourselves was really trying to understand, looking at the customers, how customers are evolving, how these ecosystems are actually forming, where is the industry currently positioned? So what we've done, we look at about 13 of the top 20 pharma companies and we measure them across two different dimensions. The first one is the readiness of the way they basically engage, they measure and map, understand those ecosystem dynamics and the networks of influence that exist across the different stakeholders within the local ecosystems. And the other dimension on the y-axis, the level of actions that's been undertaken by companies to really start shaping and executing effectively and engaging with those ecosystem stakeholders. And so what you can see on the slide, there are a few companies that obviously have been pivoting, and some of those companies have been mentioned during the course of today's presentation. There's still a large subset of companies that are still struggling to engage effectively with these ecosystem stakeholders. And to be honest, even the narratives and a lot of the discussions today were heavily focused on individual customers, which obviously are important because you need to treat them as individual first. But a lot of those customers have their hands tied in the way they make decisions because they're part of bigger ecosystems of multiple stakeholders. And so in our benchmarking exercise, we've identified 4 areas of gaps that we believe should be prioritized by companies, the way they actually start shaping their engagement around ecosystems. So the first one is what Karan mentioned earlier, the concept of ecosystem IQ. And it's not just about the mapping, the understanding, but it's actually how there is a consistent and systematic execution that follows that ecosystem understanding. The second one is what we call the investment mix, and we'll cover that in the next slide. But there is essentially a mismatch between what customers are actually demanding, the customer jobs the pharmaceutical company should be focusing on, and where actually investments are currently placed. There is a general over-indexing on certain jobs and less emphasis on other jobs, so actually trapping and locking a lot of the values, which can be quite critical for many of the commercial assets currently in the market. The third one is about the concept of hyper-localization. I think now we have the tech and the data to actually localize our contents, localize our actions to make it as relevant as possible for local ecosystems. But again, I would say the gaps there is what Karan's mentioned earlier, right? So it's the concept of empowered frontlines. So we don't have yet frontlines which are truly empowered to actually hyper-localize actions and contents. And the last one is speed and precision, which is again, is enabled at the moment by the availability of tech and data, but still we don't operate with the right level of speed and precision in the way we execute and engage with those ecosystem stakeholders. And where I want just actually to put the lens now is actually on the second point, the investment mix. So in this framework here, and this is coming from a lot of the work that we do. So most of the work that we do comes back in understanding what customers want, what makes customer tick, essentially. And on the basis of that one, how to design effective and successful customer engagement strategies and go-to-market models. And so what we have represented on this diagram on the columns, those are essentially the macro customer jobs. Again, it's a simplification because we couldn't obviously list all the customer jobs, but it's essentially how you optimize the care path, how you build the infrastructure that enables pharmaceutical products to actually be properly adopted, how you streamline the patient journey, how you optimize the evidence base, which is not just disseminating evidence, but actually connecting the dots across different evidence sources, but also generating new compelling evidence to build disease awareness, to build awareness around the science, and also build awareness around some of the gaps that exist in the care pathway. And the last one is obviously driving the appropriate customer experience at the HCP level. And on the y-axis, if you wish, we looked at where the value is actually located, if you think about general pharmaceutical assets along the patient funnel. And so what we've noticed in a lot of the research and the work that we currently conduct is that a lot of the focus of pharmaceutical companies is actually located in that dark purple box of the 3 stars that basically signals where we believe the pharmaceutical industry is actually over-serving customers. Even the omnichannel narrative today is just beautiful that we have so much awareness and focus on omnichannel compared to other industries that obviously started a long time ago. But we still feel that there is a lot of over-indexing on that specific part of the customer journey, on that specific focus along the whole spectrum of customer jobs. And there are still a lot of unmet needs when it comes, for example, the type of conversation we have with customers. So we've heard, and probably you've heard that as well in your research that you conduct within your companies, customers don't want to focus just on the product. I was actually at a conference about a month ago, and there was an interesting statistic whereby only 20% of the conversation the HCP receives, they want that conversation to be focused on the products. 80% should be focused on disease state, on the patient, on the care pathway, all sorts of other needs that the customers have beyond the product. But even if you think about the work we do on patient support programs, that obviously there's been a lot of investment from the industry on patient support programs to make sure that obviously we deliver the right value to patients. However, when we've conducted very in-depth conversations with patients, what comes very clear is that there is an over-indexing on technology and all the bells and whistles that often comes with patient support programs, and not on some of the kind of the micro nuances that actually make the customer and the patient happy. And actually one was quite eye-opening is if you think about what matters to a patient that's just been prescribed a pharmaceutical, isn't the efficacy of the drug, isn't all the bells and whistles, it's actually how much the drug is going to make me sick. It's all about the safety, the side effects. And so I think the way you onboard the patient, the way you capture those nuances to understand exactly what's going to make the patient tick and ultimately make the patient adherent to a therapeutics, that will change significantly ultimately the value the pharmaceutical companies can actually capture. And then the last one, there is increasing awareness and discussion, but not enough, around the role that the pharmaceutical industry can actually play in terms of building the infrastructure along the care pathways. There are certain pharmaceuticals, both very complex therapeutics like CAR T, cell and gene therapies in general, but even if you think about Alzheimer's, where before actually making sure that the drugs get utilized correctly by physicians and prescribed to patients, you need to build the whole infrastructures. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the concept of neurology deserts, but obviously there is a lot of headlines these days around Alzheimer's disease because luckily we have some pharmaceutical products that seem to produce some effects. And however, in the US, there are some states where essentially there is a massive infrastructural gaps, lack of physician nurses that can actually treat the right number of patients now that those pharmaceuticals are currently available. So the role of the pharmaceutical company isn't just obviously awareness, so we need to really understand what are the gaps in the system and how the pharmaceutical industry can reposition themselves to actually fill some of those gaps. Not individually, obviously, collectively, but there is a clear role that can be played. And at the moment, again, the emphasis is very much on the kind of the bottom right side of this diagram. And so all this mismatch in terms of customer jobs create a distance between the industry and the customers. And so what we've done, we looked, as Karan mentioned at the beginning, we looked at one example of a company that we believe has done this extremely well outside the pharmaceutical industry. For the few survivors that actually decided to stay for the last section of the day, can I just get a show of hands how many people have heard of Ayer? So, it's few, I think, in the dark. But so for those of you who don't know Ayer, and I don't want to dwell too much on this one, but so Ayer is a global leader in electric appliances. And I think what Ayer became famous for is because they moved from a very bureaucratic organizational structure to a highly, obviously, bottom-up, frontline empowered structure whereby they basically created 4,000 microenterprises on the premise of two key principles. The first one is creating zero distance to the user, removing all the hurdles, all the bureaucratic layers that created distance with the end users. And the second one is everyone is an entrepreneur, creating the right incentives and mechanisms within the organization to actually empower and drive the right behavior change at the local level to drive ultimately innovation at the customer level. And so when we look at pharma, we believe there are 5 principles that can actually be applied to the pharmaceutical customer engagement models. The first one, obviously, is that concept of zero distance to the customers. I personally have never been a big fan of the customer centricity word. I think I get the meaning, but it still doesn't bridge the gap that still exists between a company and the end users, whether that being the DHCP, whether it being the nurse, the payers, or the patients, depending on whatever compliance you have in the local market. The second one is the concept of empowered frontlines. Still, we use frontlines which are very much execution-focused. There have been some change in some companies, but we do believe that in a context of organized customers and local ecosystem becoming more and more powerful, you need to delegate some of the powers and decision rights down at the bottom of the pyramid. The third one is shift from selling products to selling user experiences. Number 4 is about, and that goes hand in hand with the concept of empowered frontline. It's just driving rapid innovation and co-creation with the customer. And the last one is moving away from the incremental logic we often have, the way we set target, and using leading target outside in perspective to set the right ambitious goal that take into consideration the potential of a given territory, ecosystem, instead of basically just taking the target from the previous year and adding a little bit on top for the following year. So basically going to like a zero-based approach in the way we set targets and give objectives to our organization. Just in the interest of time, I just want to focus on a couple of concepts. When we think about the role of this microenterprise for pharma, the work that we do usually starts with 2 core platforms when we think about the design of a microenterprise organization. The first one is what we call the user experience platform, which is essentially the front line. But the way we do it, we start from the customer jobs, understand exactly what the customer needs, and instead of starting with the roles, and oftentimes the design process of a new frontline organization starts thinking about the roles. How many customers I have, what are the implications in terms of sizing, and then you basically build by using the existing roles, and then we know over time that as access becomes relevant, patient becomes relevant, what we do, we essentially add an extra layer, right? And that creates complexity in terms of orchestration. So what we've done in a lot of the work that we've worked on is actually thinking about what are the core skill set, what are the different elements of the DNA that the frontline need to drive to maximize the user experience. And there are 4 persona and profile that we see more and more. The first one is what we call the system architect, right? So we don't have enough system thinkers when we think about the work that gets done at the frontline level. The second one, I think that there is enough indexing on this role, is the customer experience champion. The second one, disease navigator, so how we have people can truly connect the dots, not just at the product level, but the disease area level, connecting those between the different evidence sources. And the fourth one is what we call the patient access enabler, right? So somebody whose whole mindset is actually to remove all the frictions along the patient journey and making sure that there's no funding constraints. Now, the benefit of doing this is basically you really truly focus on the key components of the frontline organization. Then you can move on and codify them into roles, and then it usually comes down to constraints in terms of financial constraints, organizational constraints, and most importantly, the talents that you have internally, right? So there is a lot of repurpose that needs to happen in order to have the right organization that can actually engage with these organized customers in the right format. And then the second layer that we have is actually what needs to happen at the back office of the organization. And we see very much what we call like a back office as a service organization, whereby the back office organization restructuring a set of solution platforms that can actually empower and support the user experience layers and the frontline to really deliver customers in the fastest way possible to consumers, right? I think it's turning red, I think, and also everybody's very tired. So the work that we do, I mean, we're happy to follow up and have a separate conversation. The way we deploy those type of work isn't just the same across all territories. we take a very much a localized approach. So there are different archetypes when you look at the microenterprise, which ultimately changes based on the context the microenterprise needs to operate within, right? And it depends very much on the investment constraints you have and what's the relevant to the patient funnel, where is the value trapped at the top of the funnel, at the bottom of the funnel, across the different territories that you commercialize your assets within. But to conclude, there are 4 things we want to leave you with before the cocktails or freshen up or whatever. Again, starts by building, and that's very critical in all our analysis, start by building high ecosystem IQ in your organization. The second one, start by understanding the customer and re-indexing those investment levers on the right customer jobs, right? Because especially in a context where we need to have very lean enterprises, it's fundamental to make sure that all the values are located on the right customer jobs which are in demand. The third one is the investment that is needed to reshift and repurpose resources. And those are essentially the 3 key ingredients in our mind to ultimately lead to what we believe the ultimate vision should be, which is creating this zero distance to customers in your frontline organization. And with that zero distance concept, I think we're truly zero distance to cocktails or whatever break you're looking for after like 9 hours of conference. So we thank you for your attention. Really thank you, the last survivors, for your attention. And we're happy to take questions either now or probably after cocktails or tomorrow morning. So thanks a lot. And